Welcome to Directly Correct, a People's podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, Prasad Setty, lecturer at Stanford School of Business, advisor, and former VP at Google.
Thanks to our sponsors, One Model. One Model helps people leaders at large organizations make consistently brilliant talent decisions by unlocking the analytical value of the data dispersed across your business. One Model's people analytics platform takes all of the heavy lifting out of data extraction, cleansing, modeling, analytics, and reporting of enterprise workforce data. One Model pioneered people data orchestration and has perfected the ethical use of AI and data science for leaders who need transparent and explainable decision support systems. HR and business teams trust its accurate reports, analyses, and storytelling capabilities. Data scientists, engineers, and people analytics professionals love the combination of governance and flexibility that no other workforce insights platform can provide. To learn more, book a demo at onemodel.co/directionallycorrect. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
I got another story that we could talk about.
What is it?
So I was tapped to do it's like the blinds, it's like the one fucking spot in the room that's getting sunlight. It's like my fucking eyeball. Like, Jesus Christ.
Just move it over real quick.
I mean, like, it'll be gone in like.
Yeah. Can you hear us, Prasad?
I can hear you now. Cole, Scott, good to see you folks.
Scott's trying to get away from the sunlight. There's this one beam that was going like right down the middle of his face.
It's just going to follow you throughout this conversation. That's shining the spotlight, Scott.
Oh, yeah. I mean, finally, the respect I deserve.
Exactly.
Right? From a PA legend, no doubt, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Prasad's a made man in the people analytics community for sure.
Made man, yes.
Yeah.
Did you get anointed? Did someone have to come put their sword on each shoulder?
Maybe it's up to you folks.
Oh, okay.
We knight you as a directionally correct people analytics legend, Prasad Setty.
This is the final boss.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Well, Prasad, thank you for joining us. I mean, you kind of come in with no need for an introduction, but for those who don't know who you are, I mean, I think you founded the people analytics team at Google, which got all the publicity for so many years. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like and what your favorite memory or some of the favorite work you did while you were there?
So many good things, and it's great to be with you folks first, and to see how much this community is sort of thriving and coming together. I joined Google in 2007. I was hired to sort of pull together a bunch of analysts that we had in the HR function, which at that time had been rebranded to be called People Operations. And so I came in, and one of my first decisions was to name ourselves People Analytics rather than HR Analytics. I was inspired by the People Operations nomenclature, and I thought that the work that we do should benefit the people of Google, not just the HR function. And sometimes, these kinds of naming conventions certainly dictate the kind of work that you do and your identity. And so I think it was certainly a good move from that side. Prior to that, of course, we've had a long history of data-driven decision-making or decision support in the people space, right? Going back to armies in the past that needed to do better workforce planning. That's been happening for centuries. 100 years back, you had sort of the time motion kind of movement and so on. You had like a whole bunch of things in org IO psychology that has extended over decades. So I came into
Were you the guy that said, like, at Google, we definitely need free breakfast and free lunch?
I wish I could take credit for that, Scott, but that was a long-standing tradition well before I joined. We did do a few studies on testing how good it was, because we would joke about the Google 15, people putting on like 15 pounds when they joined Google because of all the free food. And so we did like a bunch of experiments on, hey, how do you get people to eat healthy while still keeping it free? So it was fun stuff like that you got to do.
That sounds amazing. To sit there like Jane Goodall, just like watching Googlers coming in and out of the cafeteria.
Exactly, exactly.
The
Uh,
employees are the monkeys. I mean, uh,
yeah, we like to call them experiments, but it sounds a little weird saying that you're going to be experimenting on your people, right? So studies, research are all like better terminology than talking about them as experiments, even though that's what they were.
Well, the name of the game's the same. Whether you're talking about free food or like trying to make sure that bosses don't, berate employees. It's all about improving the employee experience to get more out of them, make them more productive, have a better experience, keep them
Yeah.
longer, all this sort of stuff. So I mean, it's totally legit. I mean, it's. Hey, if anyone's out there, I would love a free lunch. I will take it.
we're takers. Yeah.
Yes.
We-
It's
we'll do
certainly
it.
become the norm across many startups and so on, right? It's certainly become the
Yeah,
norm.
absolutely. Well, Prasad, tell us what are the 4 E's? Because in preparation for this podcast, I was asking you a little bit about your time at Google, and I was like, what is it that you think is kind of your lasting impact? And you said the 4 E's, and I was like, oh, what are the 4 E's? So can you talk to us about that?
I don't know whether I would say that is the lasting impact that I'd have, but I sort of thought about the 4 E's, which we borrowed lovingly from the healthcare industry, as one of the ways to think about the impact that we have in the analytics space, right? And the 4 E's stand for effectiveness, efficiency, experience, and equity. And the thought is that when you're testing out any of these experiments, like Scott was talking about, when you're testing out any kind of intervention, you're probably trying to come up with an outcome variable that is along those dimensions. And our conjecture was that it's not that any one outcome variable is important, but you're really trying to think about outcome variables across any of these four dimensions, right? Effectiveness is perhaps one of the most important. You're trying to say, well, if I put in a new hiring process, it actually helps me hire better performing people. For instance, that would be
Hmm.
effectiveness. Efficiency would be, but can I implement that new hiring process in a way that is not as time consuming and takes too much effort from either the interviewer or the interviewee. Experience would be whether people like that process, and equity is, of course, ensuring that across demographics you don't see any kind of adverse effects around it. The key about the 4 E's is that you can't maximize all of them at the same time with any of these interventions.
Hmm.
So it really becomes a very intentional choice from the designers to say, what is it that you want? And I often find that it's not coming up with the measures that is like difficult. It's not coming up with the experiments. It's often that
Mhm.
kind of intentional conversation where you try something out and then you act surprised that it didn't do all the things that you wanted to do, because you're trying to perhaps say, well, yeah, I like that process, but look at all the extra time that it's making my interviewers take. I don't like that. And so I feel like understanding what exactly are the bunch of outcome variables you want in a particular intervention is really key. And so that's sort of where the 4E's came from. And my own thought is efficiency is easiest to measure in some of these dimensions, right? Because it's easier to measure how much it's costing me, how much time it is taking me. And so there's a
And
default
that's
to
why
it.
it's the best E, right?
Yeah,
Because it's the easiest.
it's the easiest. Exactly, it's the best. So my thought is like, anytime you're trying out something new, take all the Gen AI stuff, for instance, you want to first offer a great experience. You want to get adoption first, and then you try and see if you have effectiveness and certainly equity. And then finally you end up with efficiency, right? And so that's sort of how I would lay out the architecture, but it's very easy to jump to efficiency right from the get-go. And I think that's just weak.
I think a lot of the Gen AI products, the initial ones that came out, really lacked that experience aspect, right? They came out with just like a janky UI and this sort of
Yeah,
stuff, and like it took a specialized population to see, oh, here's the value in that
right.
before like the rest of the public actually gotten on board with it. I think we're still seeing that actually. Don't really see.
Still very early stages, right? You still have very simple chatbot type UI, and so I'm sure there are lots of people trying to figure out what are better experiences that you can have out there. But yeah, absolutely, great example of being very early on and just throwing something out there with new technology.
And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Just
Mhm.
experimentation, just prototyping.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know you're doing some teaching at Stanford now as well. What do you think the impact of AI is having or will be on education, or at least higher education?
A lot. Certainly, I think you folks follow Ethan Mollick as well, right?
Oh
He's
yeah.
very prolific around his sort of translation of how Gen AI is used in the real world, and particularly as a professor at Wharton, he certainly has firsthand experience in how he sees his own students using it, and we see that at Stanford too. Uh, there is a lot that it's going to change, how we think about assignments, how we think about what creative work is, and so on. And on the good part of it, I really like it when Gen AI enables co-creation, that because you get into a dialogue, we're all better off when we sort of are able to play out our ideas and voice our opinions with someone else, have it reflected back to us, and then continue a dialogue, right? Like we learn a lot more. It's
Hmm.
very rich. And so I think Gen AI as an interface enables that. So I think those are the positive areas of how it can be used in education to further learning. The
What does that mean? Is that like is that like group projects or like trying to encourage collaboration between students or to come up with better ideas? I know there's a lot of brainiacs here at Stanford.
There is, Scott, and so I think of two types of problems, right? One is, there are like several types, but for this purpose, I think of either convergent problems or divergent problems. Convergent problems, you're trying to get to like one specific answer. And I don't think Gen AI is super great at that. You have other kinds of tools for that. It'll get better, but because of hallucinations and so on, which they've tried to address quite a bit, I don't think it's like the greatest for convergent problems. But for divergent problems where you're trying to think about what are 10 different ways I might approach this, or what are 10 different ideas that I might have, I think it's really useful to sort of broaden your initial perspective, right?
Mhm.
And so that is where I think this kind of a dialogue based approach can truly help with your critical thinking. One example that I'll share about my own initial experiences with these tools. Um, Now that I sort of do my teaching and advising and so on, I don't work with a team every day like I used to at Google. And I sort of missed that, right? And I knew that as I was
Yeah.
heading into this kind of new adventure. So I would recreate the personas of my team in, take your favorite chat gpt or Claude or Gemini. So I'm not just asking Gemini to talk to me as its own persona, but I'm actually creating like six different personas for it, and I say like, this is my virtual team. And so as I brainstorm, as I think about like, what should I share on the Directionally Correct podcast, or what should I share at this presentation I'm making, I have my own ideas. And then I have my virtual team respond back to me and say, oh, Anna would always think about execution, right? Like Steph T-Ball would
Yeah.
always think about like, people. And like, so we could all play that, role play that in our own minds, but it becomes too cognitively difficult, right? At some point, you lose who you are, and you're trying to like see the world from very different perspectives. And so, I think those are like the kinds of examples where Gen AI can sort of like play a helping hand and help you build your own perspectives.
I think that's a super use for Gen AI.
Yeah,
Like the ChatGPT little phone app,
yeah,
I'll just sit there and talk to it. I think it's great. Just
yeah,
bounce ideas off of it, but have, like, actual agents, and you just
yes.
replace your old team with, a virtual team.
I
I
wouldn't
love it.
go as far as that, right? But at least you could say, like, here are a few defining characteristics. And
Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah. But going back to the education piece, I'll tell you like one downside that I'd love to think through, and I'd love your ideas on it too. One is, I think, if you're in that sweet spot of co-creation, I think Gen AI can be super helpful for any of us, whether it's about summarizing, creative thinking, expanding your horizons, etc. But I think there are probably quite a few significant people on both ends of the spectrum there. Some people who say, I don't buy any of this stuff, and I'm going to like
Mhm.
leave that behind. And then on the other spectrum, incredibly dependent on these. It's like, I'm going to copy and paste, right? And so I think both of those are like sort of dangerous in terms of taking them too far. But given other pressures that people might have or their preconceived notions, it's likely a sizable population out there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you feel like that
Yeah.
over dependency or under utilization are issues, and how might we
Yeah.
address that?
I mean, the thing I'll say is, just imagine if Gen AI didn't exist. Both of the things you described were already problems. To put it in the context of higher
Sure.
education, you already had students who just went in and plagiarized.
Yeah.
They literally took right out of the book and they copy and pasted it
Right.
and said it was their own work.
Right.
And then you had students who just said, "Screw the assignment altogether. I'm not doing it."
Yeah.
And they just threw it. They threw the table
Yeah.
over and said that they're not doing it. So I feel like that already existed. It's just being kind of projected onto the AI context and seeing like this is AI's problem to fix. And I'm like, no, this has always been a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, right. These things have always existed, and there were other tools. Every era, you seem to come up with new tools that help people sort of game the system, if you will, in interesting ways. And this is today's problem to deal with. And then I go back to the four E's. People are basically using them for efficiency because of
Yeah.
whatever else they have going on in their lives. But if the goal of higher education is effectiveness of transmitting learning, what would we want to do given the existence of this new technology? Is, I
I think
guess, the
I
question.
think we're gonna see a shift. I think we're gonna see a divergence. Like obviously, anyone can produce a 2-page research report on, I don't know, the new king of England. So what any
Sure,
topic,
sure,
any topic, but where people will sort of like differentiate themselves would be able to critically read that information, discern their own points of view and what is perhaps blasé or
yeah,
what have you, and come up with their own sort of point of view on these sort of things.
yeah,
So I think that I've already noticed myself becoming pretty damn dependent on Gen AI.
sure,
Right, I use it every day, uh, but being able to critically see what's coming out and shape that information is like I think what's going to be in the near future
yeah,
until it stops the hallucinations and
right.
all this sort of stuff. And I
That
think we can see that sort of same thing in academia. That's where it kind of needs to go.
that ability is, again, I would take your example, Scott, and say that is exactly the kind of co-creation that I think would be fun to see more of, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I saw Prasad that you used was it Gemini the other day to summarize the Google antitrust lawsuit, and we can put a link to the posts in the comments. What did you learn about that lawsuit via using this to summarize the text?
I still remain partial to Google products, so certainly use Gemini for some of these things. But that particular lawsuit sort of judgment by the judge was 277 pages long. Right? There's no one
Oh
who's going
yeah.
to read that except for perhaps the most enthusiastic legal suit followers, or certainly the plaintiffs and the defendants. And so I thought, these are like just such great use cases for all of us sort of being knowledgeable. And there is like one precursor to that call that I wanted to share, which is, um, you know, that we often get this kind of news digested to us from whatever media we consume, right? And those all come with their own biases or perspectives of view. And certainly for public information like this, where anyone can have access to it, what is a better means of us asking our own questions that we want and get the facts in the way that we want to digest them? And so that to me is the broader point. So one of the things that I've started doing using these tools is not just look at the Google ruling, but basically every Supreme Court judgment that comes out there is published. And so we can
Mhm.
all be better consumers of what is happening with regulations in or law in the country by being consumers ourselves about these important rulings that will shape society for decades to come. And so that was the thought behind something like this. But anyway, what I learned was how complex the lawsuit itself was, and what evidence the judge used in basically saying intent does not matter, but there is enough evidence that Google has monopoly in a couple of markets, which they defined as text advertising and the general search market. And they, whether they intend to or not, they are engaged in activities that further their monopoly, and that is something that the court finds not to be good, right? And so we'll see what the remedy phase itself is going to be about. But certainly things like the distribution, the exclusive distribution agreements that Google has with Apple or with Samsung, et cetera, to have the Chrome browser or Google search be the default, are all seen by the court as, hey, these are actions you're taking to continue your monopoly power and preventing other people like Microsoft, et cetera, to build such businesses because you just have more scale.
Mhm.
And so
Is that the antitrust that they're putting their browser into other devices?
exactly, and it's basically saying when you enter into exclusive distribution agreements with Apple and pay them a lot of money, then you get scale, you get a lot more data, and that makes your search better. And so it just creates a cycle for you
Yeah,
on how you continue to build your market share in search. And because of that, no one else can enter the market. And so that's the
Yeah.
thought behind the court's
Well,
ruling.
Well, 2 points here. One to build on what you said about, if people are just getting your news through some kind of media source. There was probably two different kinds of media articles. One is like, Google is evil and the antitrust lawsuit proves it.
Yeah.
And the other one is Google did nothing wrong. This lawsuit is frivolous. And I think it's good to take a factual basis to like, okay, why are these things happening? And the second point is like, well, I wonder if the judge used ChatGPT to write 277 pages of stuff just so nobody would read it, and then you used, Gemini to decode everything that was said.
I know, isn't that crazy that we're all going to be using these tools to write, and then someone else is going to use them to understand what we
we'll have our
say.
agents talk to each other, and just go on with our
Exactly.
life.
On the media thing, Cole, like you said, have you folks heard of the Russell conjugation?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a Bertrand Russell sort of views. A classic example is sort of statements that go along the lines of, "I am firm, you are obstinate, they are pig-headed," right? And so you're sort of like trying to convey the same thing, but because of the words that you use, you basically shape people's opinions very, very differently. And so I think media certainly does a lot to propagate that kind of Russell conjugation. And so if you're all able to absorb complex information factually without stripping away that kind of dissonance, then we might all be better off for it.
Yeah. Well, Prasad, I think the world wants to know, what are you up to nowadays? So we talked about Stanford and being able to lecture in that world, but what are you doing to stay kind of up to date in the technology space?
This is a fun time, certainly for me. Broadly, I do a few things. I advise some large companies working with their CHROs and CEOs as they think about scaling and growing their organizations. I work with a few HR startups as they think about products in the space. And of course, everyone is trying to figure out how to use Gen AI in this. I teach this course at Stanford. It's only a short commitment. I only teach 1 quarter a year. It's an elective in the business school. And again, it is about helping students form startup ideas in the world of work. And so that is sort of what I do. And then beyond that, just get plenty of time to travel, spend time with family, and live a very, very sort of a life where I feel like time, I have abundance of time, which is a good feeling to have.
Where do you wanna go? Where haven't you been that you need to go?
We are. There are like quite a few. I was with some friends last week, and we haven't done an African safari, so I'm sure like that will
Oh,
be something that we do. But my wife and I have been to all 7 continents together, so we've done
holy
quite a bit
cow.
of traveling in the past for sure. Yeah.
E
Uh,
like, even Antarctica?
Even to Antarctica. This was a little more than 10 years back. We spent a week on the continent. If you take a cruise, you usually are in the Antarctic seas, which the continent is surrounded by 200 miles of ice, so you never get close to land. But if you get to be on land, which is what we did, then you get to see things like emperor penguin colonies and so on. It's just spectacular, right? Like it's just every day was an adventure. You go through some ice caves one day, and you're climbing up a glacier the
Damn.
next day, and you go tour a Russian research base the following day, and then if the weather is right, you fly a few hours to go see emperor penguins. And yeah,
What kind
it's
of research the Russians got going on down there? How do
I
you?
don't know, because no one can own land out there, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
the only thing there are all these research bases, and I have no idea what they're all doing.
I mean, this is where the flat earthers say that that's the end of the end of the world. They say that's the edge of the world, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Prasad, I'm glad you didn't fall off the edge.
I'm so
You
glad.
went
I'm
down
so
there.
glad that I didn't get sucked up there.
Now, you told me that there's this word, and I could not find it, I could not pronounce it, but it means the science of watchmaking. What is the science of watchmaking, and what is the word I'm thinking of?
You're probably thinking of horology, I think.
Horology. What is horology?
It is the science of time broadly, but like more specifically around the science and art of clockmaking and watchmaking, which sort of has evolved over the centuries. And yeah, it's uh, it's a fun topic.
Like CHR, like chronometer, chronology.
Yeah, chronometry is more, it's like an Uber, more broadly a view of the sense of time itself,
Yeah.
whereas horology is much more defined around how we build clocks or watches and things like that.
This is something we've never talked about. Like, I'm not necessarily a watch guy, but I mean, you look at the inside of a watch, and it's
Yeah,
just fucking fascinating.
it
Like the
is.
mainspring,
Yes,
and like that escarpment, like letting out
yes,
the. I mean, it's super cool. The flywheel, the balance wheel,
the balance wheel.
super cool. Yeah,
They are such mechanical marvels. When I grew up, the world was just getting into all the quartz watches, and so I had some of these battery operated things, which were incredibly cheap and efficient, right? But over the last 20 years or so, I've just fallen back in love with mechanical watches, which have such amazing artistry, engineering, new materials that they use, going back to refining methods from a couple of centuries ago. It is just fascinating. It seems like a few other things, sort of like a golden age of watchmaking now.
that's the interesting thing. That is,
Yeah,
this isn't something just in the last 100 years.
yeah,
Like they're making these. You go like see, I don't know, clock 500-600 years old in
right,
Prague
right.
today, right? I mean, just like amazing technology over there. It must have been like a alien spaceship landing in your town.
At that time, right? And especially when at that time and right after that, when they were trying to explore the seas and navigate
Yeah.
across the oceans to find the Americas and so on. You needed all these marine
Yeah.
chronometers as navigation devices. And so there was a real need for much better timekeeping and so on. And so
Yeah.
no wonder it attracted a lot of innovation and ideas at that time. And now, of course,
There was money to be
there
made.
was money to
They
be
had to
made.
figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? You might not know the answer to this, but I've always wondered this. How did they settle on 1 second being a second? And how do they know from clock to clock that a second is the same interval of time as a second on another clock? How do they figure that out?
I don't know how they did that originally. That's a great question to research. But I do remember reading call that once they got the whatever international sort of standard setting organization, then they basically decided that 1 second was the time that it took a particular metal, I'm blanking on which one it is, to go through a certain number of oscillations, right? Like, and so that's how they've defined it now. I don't know how they got to that point of deciding that that would be the standard. But yeah, that's sort of like how they've defined it today.
Fascinating. I would It is a good you would need a way kind of pre-advanced technology to determine what interval of time would be.
Sure.
And so that does make sense that you would use something that actually that's very clever. Okay.
It
Well, that's the metric system where, like, 1 calorie is how much it takes to heat up, like, 1, centimeter of water, 1 degree, all that
Exactly,
sort of stuff.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure like all of these standard setting organizations had a field day maybe 100 or 200 years back. But talking about seconds, like one of the things that sort of prompted me following COVID to think about like this kind of new exploration was reading an essay that talked about how we're all born billionaires. We're all born billionaires in time, in seconds, essentially.
Mhm.
The talking about the difference between a million and a billion, like a million seconds is just a little over 2 weeks. A billion seconds is a little over 31 years, right? And so with standard life expectancy, we're all born with like probably, let's say, like somewhere between 2 to 3 billion seconds of lifetime. And when I read this essay, I said, "Oh, I probably have another good billion seconds, assuming a normal life expectancy. What do I want to do with this next billion?" And that's sort of like how I thought through. Well, while I love everything about Google and my team and the work that we did, it sort of was like anchoring for like a new learning journey, and that's sort of how I ended up
It's
in
a
the
really
space.
good way to look at life because I mean, we all think like, horrible death is gonna come in the future,
Yeah,
but if you kind of, unfortunately, like, see it, like, coming at you, like, I only have this much reserve left.
yeah,
I better
yeah.
get on my horse and do something with life.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
I've only got a few billion seconds left. I better
Yeah.
spend my time
Better.
making a dumb podcast on people analytics, you know.
Do you do any photography while you're, in Africa or,
In
anywhere?
Antarctica, I haven't. I've only been to South Africa. Yes, lots. I love. That's the other thing that I like. Photography. So lots of wildlife.
What do you shoot with? DSLR? You just use an Android phone? What do you do?
These phones have gotten so good
They're
these days. They've
nice. They're
gotten
so
so
good.
good. I was one of those people who used to shoot with slide film with my SLR and
Oh,
my long
nice.
lenses. It took me a while before I got used to digital cameras, and then I certainly have my stash of DSLR equipment and still have some of my old
Yeah.
lenses. But phones have become so good that you don't need to sort of lug these things around a
It's
lot
not
these
bulky,
days.
you don't have to, like, worry about your $1,200 camera being stolen. There are some good, like, mirrorless cameras out there, but, yeah, I mean, your phone does an excellent job these days. The lenses on them become
The
fantastic.
lenses have become really good, and yeah, all the digital processing that they have is just
Oh,
remarkable,
yeah.
incredible, incredible.
That's fascinating. One of the things I found out about you, Prasad, is that something you and Scott share is you both like driving. And I was like, really? I was like, that's the thing that does it for. I guess driverless cars are not in your future. But why do you like driving?
Uh, I don't know. It's like there's some of this common arc between the love of watches and cars and so on. Something about mechanical
That makes
devices. Something
sense.
about right. Something
Yeah.
about movement. Something about driving. How about you, Scott? Like what drives your passion around this?
Oh, like, I just like the control, like but no, I don't mind long road trips. The most I've ever done is, like, 18 hours in one day
Oh
from
wow. Yeah.
Austin, Louisiana
Yeah.
to, Marfa, Texas, but are you talking, like, long haul or, like, you just gotta be always in the driver's seat?
I like to always be in the driver's seat. I like track driving as well. I like road trips and long explorations, particularly going down really scenic places. So all of it, anything to do with driving. Yeah,
Well, I hate driving.
Really?
I I was so looking forward to driverless cars. Like, I was just like, ah, if I never had to drive again, I'd be okay with it.
I did go to the, BMW Welt in Munich, and they
yeah,
had, like, all their obviously all their high-end cars and all this shit, but they also had these, like, prototype cars,
yeah,
and one looked like a VW
yeah.
van, like, from the '60s, but all 4 seats kinda faced inwards, there's no steering wheel, no nothing.
Right.
It's like a pill, like it looked like a pill, and you would just, like, pop in there with your family and just it
Yeah.
go wherever.
See, that's the thing. I feel like I feel like they're missing the boat on luxury. Like, because what they do is they basically turn the car into like this pod where there's like nothing going on. But if you have a car that requires driving, there's luxury all throughout the car. And so I feel like they've got to figure out what to do for people when they're not driving, if that's the case. Otherwise, nobody's going to want it, because that's why I don't have a driverless car right now, is because the driverless cars are all like really wonky.
Well, obviously the technology isn't there yet. Two sort of things I see coming. Like so with AI, there's going to be eventually be a place where you're going to get on the highway and the AI is going to take over, and you will be 6 inches from the car in front of you doing 180 miles an hour. Right. Point B, I think there's going to be a time and place where you're gonna be shamed out of driving. People are gonna say it's there's gonna be deemed unsafe and you're, slowing up traffic or you are just, out there, messing things up for everyone else. Kinda like the pandemic. Oh, you're not wearing your mask or you don't have your shot or
Right.
whatever. But I see these two things coming and it's gonna be fascinating.
Yeah. That's like the iRobot future in that movie. You know,
Yeah.
the main guy, Will Smith, is like the only guy that drives a car. Everybody else, does the 6 inches away, 180 miles an hour. I look forward to that future. I want to go 180. I don't want it to take so long to get from point A to point B. I welcome this.
And I think one more thing in that future call is um, you wouldn't need to own a car, right? And I think that is something that
Yeah.
all these companies are betting on, that it's all going to be some kind of ride sharing kind of concept where no one needs to own anything because you're always going to have always on transportation accessible to you. So why own something that depreciates?
Yeah, we can all just eat bugs and everything will be great. No, let's do some confusion matrix. The confusion matrix. Real quick, we wanted to say thanks again to One Model, the AI and people analytics pioneer, for sponsoring the episode. And now back to the confusion matrix. Scott, you have a confusion matrix for us?
I do, Prasad. Are you ready for this?
I am. Cole prepared me for it. Apparently, it's something new that you're doing.
Well, if your answers are to Cole's likings, he will provide you with a social media tile that or you can share with your friends and family. If not, great shame will come to all involved. Okay, number one, Prasad. What's your guilty pleasure? TV show, movie? You got anything out there?
Uh, all of those TV shows, movies. Yes, I'm like particularly fond of the Bond franchise for sure.
Oh,
Really?
okay.
What's
That's
your favorite Bond?
I'm gonna date it. I think like some of this is just stuff that you grew up with, right? The first Bond movie that I saw was The Spy Who Loved Me with Roger Moore, and
oh,
it had
yeah.
the Lotus Esprit Turbo that goes underground, and I was like, "Whoa, what a world this is!" That remains one of my favorite movies. But I think all the recent ones have been incredibly good, incredibly
Yeah,
good.
they have.
Daniel
Actually, I
Craig's
mean,
done
he
a
might be
fantastic
my
job.
favorite. Yeah, just because I think they were all excellently written.
Yeah.
I like my Bond a little cheesy. Those days, he like jumps over like a bus and like shakes his little bow tie. Like hell yeah. What about you, Cole? You got anything embarrassing going on?
Embarrassing. I mean, we were talking about Downton Abbey before we started
Are
recording
you on
today.
Downton Abbey right now?
No, not right now, but I have watched it all the way through. I think twice with my wife, and yeah, that's a good one.
Prasad, do you have a treasured possession? Doesn't necessarily have to be valuable, but something that's personal to you that's invaluable.
Sure. I'll maybe we were talking about watches, so I'll say like one of my first watches that I got.
Who gave it to you? And
My dad, and this was a Casio that had a bright little digital display, but then it also had these tiny little keys, so you could use it as a calculator.
Oh
I don't know
yeah.
whether you've seen those from the old days. It doesn't work anymore, but I still have it stored somewhere.
I got a question about watches, real quick. How do you know if I can't remember the word you used again about what the science of watchmaking? How do you know if someone's a poser in the science of watchmaking community? Like how do you figure out if they really don't know, like if they're not into it like you're into it?
Oh, I think you would just ask them whether you could ask them one of two questions. One is to tell you which watch brands they favor, and so based on who they list or who their favorite
Oh
watchmakers
yeah.
are of the current generation, you know how sort of deep they are, and certainly if they say Rolex. Uh, no, it's a great brand, but not perhaps for
That's
serious
blasé,
horology.
man.
Well, so what's the best brand? Tell us. Like
What is
I need to know at cocktail parties so I can sound sophisticated. Like what's the best one?
Oh, there's a watchmaker, a Swiss watchmaker, FP Journe, Francois Paul Journe, who over the last 30 years has just been incredible in terms of just thinking about the technology itself, but also the design of his watches. He doesn't speak English. I remember because we invited him over to Google. I was part of this little watchmaking community, watch loving community there, and so we had him over to talk to us. A huge chip on his shoulder, and knew that he was like incredibly brilliant and
Hell
good.
yeah. I love
Uh,
that.
but
I love that.
yeah, that perhaps goes with the territory, right? Like you
Yeah.
gotta
Uh, how much are we talking for a Bijan watch?
the this anywhere from, I would say, probably it starts at 30,000 to the sky is the limit.
As
Yeah,
high as you wanna go?
as high as you want to go.
I was meaning to tell you that my favorite watch brand is FP Journe. So you didn't know that before this, but
There you go.
that,
Look at that.
yeah.
I do have a watch horror story. When I was a kid, my dad took me to an auction and bought me a pocket watch, like a train pocket watch, and it's from the 1800s, this sort of thing. It wasn't working, and he passed away, so it became very valuable to me just as a sentimental sort of thing. My mother was a teacher and had a grandfather in her class, a grandfather of a student who's like, "Oh, I fix watches. Can you give it to me?" I was like, "Hell yeah. This is like win-win scenario." Gave it to him and like time's marching on. It's like been like months, been like 6 months, been like a year. Like, where the hell's the watch? And like it's like, oh, he's gotten sick. Apparently the guy just took it apart just to see what it was like and just handed it back in pieces. I still have it to this day. I come across it every time I move.
Oh my god,
And
that's
like now it's got this
horrifying.
like bag full of like parts, watch
But
parts.
What an ass.
Well, I run into okay, I've been thinking about this, like, all week. Um, this, like, epidemic of people stating opinion as if they're fact, right? Like, they're like, "Oh, this is definitely the way it is." It's like, I know that that's what you think the answer is, but that's not what the answer is. So this guy positioned himself as a master chronologer, whatever he is, chronologer. And, yeah, so I wound up with I still own a bag full of watch
a
parts.
bag full of
Well,
watch parts that is just
Yeah.
waiting to be
well,
assembled.
yeah, he was half a master. He was a master at taking it apart. He just couldn't put it back together.
We just need to find the other type of master.
Yeah. Yeah.
Prasad, have you ever had an unusual job? If so, what was it?
My first job that paid me was as an environmental consultant,
Oh,
and
interesting.
one of the projects that we did
Were you 16 years old?
was for the U.S. Army, and this was to sort of take care of the Green Dragon. The Green Dragon is this experimental rocket fuel named its chemical name is pentaborane, and rocket fuel, so super explosive, very lethal, very toxic. The army had developed it in the 60s, and then they had barrels and barrels stockpiled. The DOT doesn't allow this chemical to be transported, etc. And so the army came to the company that I used to work with and said, "We need to get rid of this thing safely because we just have barrels and barrels of this sitting in these army barracks for decades." And so we designed. I was getting
Nice.
declassified defense documents from the 60s that talked about how they made this chemical and how they cleaned up lab spills afterwards. And we used the lab spill cleanup technique and scaled that and came up with like a robotic arm to sort of like open up these barrels from a mile away and like safely dispose of them.
Just
And we
throw
tested
'em
it
in the
out. The
ocean.
army loved it and said, but it's too expensive. So rumor has it that they basically took it out into the middle of the desert and blew it all up.
Buried it. Fire it into the sun.
Yeah, exactly.
See, and I'm here thinking that you're gonna be talking about working at a drive-through somewhere, and you're talking about chasing the green dragon and, yeah, decomposing 60-year-old materials. Yeah.
I think I
That
know all of Cole's old jobs, but have you ever had an unusual job, Cole?
I mean, I've had a bunch of jobs. I think so. My first job was working at a place called the Fun Factory. It's kind of like a Chuck E. Cheese's,
yeah.
Oh,
but I
yeah.
worked there when I was 16, and then I worked at. We've talked about Waffle House a bunch of times. I've worked at some restaurants, some catering companies. I worked at Hollister and Abercrombie and Fitch and the Buckle in the mall. Um,
Wow.
I,
Did you have to wear, like, the skinny jeans?
they didn't. Those were not in style yet.
Thank God.
But I wore the where they would like charge you extra to like have the faded jeans with holes in
Oh,
them.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
I definitely like, and that's when those first became popular. I definitely had those when I was working there.
That is super strong, man.
Yeah.
Okay, final one, Prasad. Do you think you could do a backflip on a trampoline
No,
right now?
no,
Not a
that
chance.
is super. I mean, I do my yoga practice, but I don't think I've like gotten to a point where I could do a backflip on a trampoline.
Is it a fear thing? Because for me, it'd be a fear thing.
Would I? No, it's just a sheer lack of ability to do that. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
If I could, I would.
Well, could you do a front flip? I feel like a front flip is so much more approachable than a back flip. A back flip is like so unnatural of emotion.
I fear it'd be easier.
Front flip is easy, man. It's like a forward roll.
A forward roll I could do. I don't know
Yeah.
whether, yeah.
Could you get up in the air and do a forward roll? That, I guess, is the
Oh,
definition of a flip, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Could you do it, Scott? Like, could you do a backflip on a trampoline?
I think if I worked up the courage, I could get around. My problem would be the control aspect. I'd either over or under rotate, and then hilarity would ensue, and the hospital
Yeah.
visit. but
Broken neck.
I think that I could do it.
Okay.
We'll put that in the next live appearance. I'll do a
Yeah.
backflip.
That would be a fun video to record.
I know for a fact, just because I go to like trampoline places with my kids, I can do a front flip. I would never even try a backflip.
I haven't been around a trampoline in ages, so maybe I'm overconfident here.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on.
Well, let's do some nerdery. The nerdery. Let me pull something up real quick. So we've got the first one is from the chief economist at ZipRecruiter. Her name's Julia Pollock, and she put together a post of some of the top things and bottom things. There it says job seekers views on hot button employment topics revealed. So what are the top things that job seekers are supportive of, and what are the things that they, I guess, hate the most? And if you start at the top of the list, you've got remote work, 4-day work week, and paid family leave are all north of 65% favorable of job seekers. At the bottom, and I thought this was the most interesting part our discussion earlier, the least favorable thing, artificial intelligence. Only 35% of people are supportive. Then they talk about skills gaps and immigration as well. But I think it's fascinating that there is this divergence between what I guess is like hype and in the media and all of that
Mm.
about artificial intelligence, but to people like job seekers or workers,
Yeah.
do they actually want this?
Yeah.
And so I don't know. What did you guys think about that chart?
I really liked that they took all of these issues and had one survey that sort of got everyone's views together on that. So it was really neat. I wonder, I was not surprised by certainly things like remote work because we've just seen that explode over the last few years following the pandemic. I'm certainly waiting for companies that would implement 4-day work weeks at scale. You have a lot of like small companies that are doing that now, and there's
Yeah.
experiments in Europe and in particular countries like the UK where they're trying to test that out. But I can't wait for the AI thing. I'm sure it's scares a lot of people, but I can't wait for a company to just say we're going to give people AI tools and we're going to see a lot more work get done and we're going to complement that with a 4-day work week. So I'd love to see some of these mashed together and provided as an employment opportunity to folks.
Like an interaction effect and a regression
Yeah,
model.
exactly.
What if you have immigration and skills gaps?
Yeah,
What do you think
yeah,
then?
exactly. That's right. That's right.
I think it's sort of the kind of workers you're looking for too, right? Like if you want people that are wildly into tech, like they're going to be more interested in the AI sort of stuff, right? I mean, trying to tease this sort of thing out. It is interesting, like so paid leave, remote work, 4-day work weeks. Those are all essentially escaping the job in a
Yeah.
certain respect.
Yeah.
So I mean, like there does seem to me need to be a balance. All right, the people I guess they're feeling overworked or need some sort of respite from the office.
Yeah, I didn't even pick up on that, but if you just to expand on what you're saying, Scott, yeah, if you look at all the things on the top of the chart, they're like, I'm cool the way I am. And all the things on the bottom of the chart are like, I need to do something
Need
differently.
to change. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, maybe that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, maybe it's like things that I'm comfortable in my space versus
Yeah,
the future's coming at me hard.
Right.
that is so interesting.
And
Huh.
I wonder what it would be like the same data if it wasn't job seekers, but like the broader population that took this survey.
Yeah, I
Is
don't
that
know. I mean,
Yeah,
you're
that's an interesting question. Like, what does the average worker look for as opposed to someone that is trying to find that next opportunity?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it'd be the same, maybe it would be different. I don't have that data. Sorry. Well, Scott, I think you might have brought this up because Prasad is doing some teaching
Oh
nowadays. But do you
yeah.
want to take us through that article?
Yes, yes, yes. So, this is how to best study for tests. So, the purpose of this was to investigate what sleep dependent memory consolidation could do in practice time during the learning process. So, they had participants learn a foreign vocabulary list until proficiency over time. And one group learned in the morning and then rehearsed it again at night. The other group learned at night and then rehearsed it again in the morning after a sleep. And what the results show is that sleep between learning and relearning reduced the amount of practice time by 50% overall. So, I mean, there's something we don't really talk much about sleep, but it's super valuable to our mentally functioning. And in this case, it sounds like being able to retain information and learn it overall. Super fascinating.
I loved that study, Scott. Just to show the power of sleep and how it reflects learning outcomes better. Um, the first thought that came to mind was the Khan Academy kind of flipped classroom model, where they basically talk
Yeah.
about learn concepts in the evening and instead of doing homework. And then when you come into the classroom, then you are basically exploring the application of those concepts or working with your teacher and peers on like more difficult areas. And so it would seem like this kind of sleep effect would support that, right? Like learn something in the evening, sleep, maybe it registers in your memory better, and then you're trying to like explore that concept further.
So
Yeah.
much goes on during the day too, right? Like, so if you learn in the morning, you get maybe a little groggy. Then,
Yeah.
like you like, I learned five vocabulary words, whatever, and then like I don't know, you get hungry, you go eat, you get a parking ticket, you got to go deal with your boss, you got to all these sort of things, and then try to recall it later in the day. Chances
Yeah.
are much slimmer.
Well, I think about like when I was in school, there was always this debate, are you better served to stay up 5 more hours at night and cram studying in the night
Yeah.
before the test, or study for an hour and get four
Uh,
more hours of sleep? And I think this kind of puts to bed, no pun intended, puts to bed the
Love
notion
it.
that
Solid.
you probably should study a little bit, have a good night's sleep, get a quick refresher, and then you're good to go, or you're as good as you're going to be probably, in terms of being able to recall some of this information. Um, as my last name would indicate, I'm a very pro sleep person. So us nappers, we know our sleeping.
I love that. I love that, Cole. And uh,
You've been working on that for years, dude. Come on.
you wanted to bring that in. I was thinking about it. This study referenced something called the Karolinska Sleepiness Index, something
Yes,
like that.
yes.
Uh, and I thought it's so cool to have like an index named after you. And I don't think it's a person. I think it's an institute in Sweden or whatever. But yeah, what index would you want named after you, Cole? Uh,
Oh, man.
I think it's clear. I want it to be the Napper
It's
Index of
gotta
sleep,
be.
right? I mean, it just the book writes itself.
exactly, exactly. We don't have such cool last names, Scott. So we'll have to think about something else.
I will say that for my dissertation, I developed an automatically generated item test. It's a intelligence test, and while we were deciding the final phase of the dissertation, it's like, well, you need to name it. I said the obvious name is the Scott Hines Intelligence Test, which the acronym is just elite.
That is a shitty test if I've ever seen one.
It is a universal experience though that we all went to school. And we're like, I'm gonna pull it all nighter and fucking rock this test, and like it never
Never works.
pans out. It's awful.
Never works.
That's your contribution to the field. No more all nighters. I love it. Love it.
Yeah, it just doesn't hit the way you think it's gonna hit.
Well, Scott, tell us about network centrality and how that's relevant.
This is a pretty interesting spin. I thought that they were going to go a different direction. Unfortunately, it's behind a paywall, so we got to extrapolate from just an abstract. But examined how individual centrality in team conflict and relationship networks relate to learning satisfaction and peer related performance. So they took 190 engineers and 52 teams, and they did this like round robin rating of each other and kind of gauged the connections within the team. And what they found is that individuals that had high in degree task conflict, so that would be essentially popularity, other people pointed to them as a relationship, were judged as higher performing and more higher contributor. Those that had high out degree centrality in team conflict, that is like self-reported connections to other groups or other members of the group, reported higher learning and satisfaction. So essentially, it's kind of a cool to take relationship dynamics and provides a unique spin on how people perceive task conflict. Um, yeah, so a takeaway is if you talk to more people in your group, you're gonna have higher satisfaction overall.
Yeah. Kids, be popular, you know?
Be
Isn't
popular.
that
I mean that's
yeah.
another takeaway. That's just a universal network analytic takeaway.
Yeah.
I really loved the study, and thanks to my Stanford credentials, I was actually able to download the
Oh,
paper, Scott.
oh,
So
we should have pinged you.
I will send it across to you both.
Look at him big leaguing
Look
us
at
so
him.
subtly too.
He actually read it. What a
I
guy.
actually
Wow.
read it
Number
because I found
one.
it so interesting because it brings together a few things that have been on my mind as it relates to organizations. And that is about conflict, right? And I thought like this paper did a really nice job, as you described, of thinking about task conflict and relationship conflict, right?
Yeah.
A task conflict would be that we are all debating each other on concepts and ideas, but not on our own personalities and traits and who we are as people, right? And so what I found fascinating was the low correlations of in and out person measures of conflict, and also the low correlation between task conflict and relationship conflict as well. So it was just fascinating to see how our own opinions are so different from how other people might have opinions about us, right? So we are like so less self-aware in some of these areas. And like you said, people who sort of are seen as being central to task conflict by bringing up debates and so
Yeah.
on are seen as higher performers. And the thought that I have, we were talking about wildlife earlier. Where I live, we get a bunch of deer always. And sometimes I'll see the deer sort of butt heads with each other, literally, right? And butt antlers with each other. And the thought that would strike me always is they're just like playing with each other. They're just learning how to perhaps, control their aggression or to develop it better. And the thought that I would always have is, why don't they teach better conflict engagement and management in organizations? It's so important. And my own experience from Google or like any other place that I worked with is healthy conflict trumps unhealthy peace. And
Yeah.
certainly in a lot of
Absolutely.
tech organizations, you have a bunch of passive aggressive people who will not engage in conflict, right? Because they find it unpleasant. And sometimes I am conflict averse too. But I think if we all learned how to have better expressions of healthy conflict, that would be amazing. And one idea there is what Daniel Kahneman did with his collaborators or even with his wife, which he termed adversarial collaboration,
Mm-hmm.
where you committed to three things. You committed to expressing the other person's point of view, not in a caricature or mocking
Yeah.
them or making fun of them, but to truly say, this is what I know about your position, which is different from mine. Then you commit to changing your mind if you can define an experiment or a study, and then you commit to publishing it. And of course he was thinking
Yeah.
about the academic circles. But I think something like that at scale would just be incredibly useful to help
Mhm.
people develop better perspectives and ideas. So anyway, a long story short, I loved this paper.
Well, basically what they're saying is You need task conflict to be dialed up
Yes,
and relationship conflict to be dialed
dial
down.
down. Exactly. And you need to be
And
self-aware about that. Right. Yeah.
yeah, and I love that, and I think there's a huge opportunity. I mean, we've talked a lot. We haven't talked about it lately, but about like the replication crisis.
Yeah.
I think there's a huge opportunity that a lot of things are, bad science is making it through because it lacks that kind of task conflict.
Right.
Everybody agrees, everybody thinks that this is the right thing, and so it doesn't stand up to scrutiny if somebody, a good faith actor, i.e., low relationship conflict, can come in and say, actually, this might not be the best thing going forward.
People perceive things differently as well, like because you stand up and you say like I disagree with you and you and you, someone else may perceive that as relationship conflict as
Sure.
well.
Yeah,
So it's like it's really these ideas of like psychological safety within the team to bring up things in a way that people will not get offended, or these parameters you're talking about, Prasad and Cole.
sure.
um
And Google never did any research on psychological safety, so Prasad's not very familiar with that
I,
literature.
I don't know anything about that.
I will say just like one more thing on this topic. At PsyOp 2 years ago, so in Boston, someone presented a paper at one of these sort of nerdy network analysis sort of sessions, essentially showing the different forms of task and relationship conflict in a team. So, like, say you have a 5 member team, and it could be one person against the other four. It could be factions, 3 on 2, all these sort of different permutations of it is like it's not just like one form of
One
it.
form of conflict.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
There
Yeah.
could be just
Yeah.
like some person that just doesn't want to get along with the group.
Right.
Well, Prasad, since we've got you here, and at this point in the podcast, nobody's listening anymore anyway, I just wanted to ask you. I was thinking about this as after we started. Like you were one of the pioneers of people analytics, and arguably, I mean, Google gets cited everywhere as doing you know, some of the most sophisticated but trailblazing work in this space. If you were starting a people analytics function in 2024 and you wanted to be doing something cutting edge and you didn't see other companies pursuing it, what would that be right now? Right? Like
Ooh.
what is the area that we're not investing in that we should be? It could be coming from the academic literature, it could be coming from anywhere. What is that space?
Wow. That is a big question. Um,
Should have been the first question.
it should, yeah, and I'd love
Yeah.
I'd love your thoughts on it too,
I
both
didn't
of
think
you.
of it earlier. Sorry.
I'd love both of your thoughts on it too. I I do think that over the next 10 years, that among all the factors that we just saw in that ZipRecruiter research, I do think generative AI is going to change how work gets done
Mhm.
in a dramatic fashion, right? Because of agents, because of technology. Broadly, the thought is that um, compute capacity powering these algorithms has increased a millionfold over the last 10 years. And thanks to scaling laws, at least the techno optimists think that it can grow another millionfold over the next 10 years. And so, what kind of possibilities would we have in there? And so, I think there's just like a question in the far future about what are our identities if not related to work, right? And so how do we
Yeah.
how do we develop that? How do we develop that over time? How do we function as society and so on? So I don't know necessarily that any single organization is going to be solving it, and I certainly don't think this is going to be tomorrow's problem. But I'm truly interested. One of the studies that we started at Google, which we call GDNA, which is modeled after the Framingham Heart Study, was to follow a population of Googlers for the rest of their lives, not just their careers, and to see what happens to life and career satisfaction over time, right? And so I sort of think about things like that, right? If we truly do believe that there's going to be a generational shift in how work gets done and what our identities are with respect to how we occupy our time and how we learn, What does that reflect on in terms of life and career fulfillment and satisfaction? So that's the kind of thing that I would want to explore further.
That's like the
So
ultimate do good. We did good by you and sent you off on your way the rest of your life, hopefully a better person and happier
And
overall,
happier and equipped to deal with any kind of change and so on, right? That
more
you're
educated.
resilient, that
Yeah.
you're,
mm,
yeah.
I, I love that thought of like basically just longitudinal research. Like I remember being at a company a few years ago and they had this idea of like, could we follow entry level employees all the way and see who actually makes it to the executive level?
Yeah.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, and like, and so that you can get over these studies that suffer from survivorship bias
Right.
and just really see what does it take to like, what does high potential mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean to accelerate someone's career? And I thought that that was fascinating. Um, I guess my answer to my own question would be a few things wrapped into one. One is, um, I think what we're suffering from right now is that people analytics isn't adding as much value as it should be, and we need to be fixing that. But
Mm,
I see that as more of a short term problem, not a long term problem.
mm,
Um, the long term issue that I see is, you know, why did Google get so much praise and love back in the day? Is because you guys are swinging for the fences.
mm,
You were really swinging for the fences and tackling big problems, and I don't see a lot of that anymore.
mm,
And I think we should be. And I think the
mm,
field is suffering as a consequence
mm,
of companies not swinging for the fences in terms of making real huge impacts, taking real big, you know, stabs at like real big problems that
mm,
organizations and even society are facing. I
mm,
think we've got that opportunity, and we're not. And I think that's where we need to be placing our bets at the moment. I don't know,
mm,
Scott. Do you have any thoughts?
mm,
I mean, yeah, just kind of projecting out. I do believe what Prasad says is true. Like Gen AI is going to fundamentally change how we work. Take away all those sort of lesser, sort of mundane tasks, and I think we're going to become more relationship focused because of it. I mean, we still derive a strong sense of belonging and meaning from our work, and we're going to have to deal with that over time. So I would say that. It's going to be more collaborative. Is going to be or a bigger premium is going to be placed on collaboration because there's going to be less mm, individual work taking place.
mm.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a fascinating discussion. Prasad, you're an amazing guest. I appreciate Alicia for introducing us, and thank you so much for joining us today. Before we give you the final word, Scott, any parting thoughts for Prasad?
Prasad, hey, it is great to meet you. I personally had no problem with you being on the podcast, and I'm so glad you showed up.
uh, such a fun
I
conversation with you folks, and yeah, where else are you going to find, like, topics all the way from watchmaking to Gen AI to people analytics? Fun stuff.
There's probably a good reason you don't find it anywhere else. So,
It was an
uh,
absolute pleasure, man. It was
yeah,
great to meet you. Great to meet you.
absolutely. Well,
Likewise,
you've been listening to Directionally Correct, People Analytics podcast with Colin Scott and today's guest, Prasad Setty. Thanks for joining us, Prasad.
thank you, folks. Talk to you soon.
Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support.